So my name's Dr. Paul Breen, and I am an author and academic who is also a member of Labour for Irish Unity. And this is the second in our series of podcasts discussing issues around the topic of Irish unity and the future shared Ireland that we would like to see. So our guest today is Ben Collins. So Ben, just to begin with, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the book that you have recently had published?
Thank you, Paul. It's great to have the opportunity to speak with you. I am somebody who is originally from East Belfast. I'm from very much a sort of a Unionist background, but I have lived and worked all across the UK, in Edinburgh, Cardiff and London, and now I'm back living in my home city of Belfast and working across the island of Ireland. And the book that I'm publishing, Irish Unity, Time to Prepare, is something that I've been thinking about for a decade, since the time of the London Olympics back in 2012. And I have always believed in the potential of a new Ireland where there could be a pluralist approach about diversity being a strength, and really moving away from sort of a monocultural view of the world. And I think that has been happening already. But I think that Brexit has really, for me, taken something that, thanks to the Good Friday Agreement, I felt able to embrace the prospect and the opportunities of Irish unity. Brexit, for me, changed it from something that was a long-term aspiration to something that I believe is an urgent necessity. And really, in my book, I'm just setting out how are the conditions created that will lead to a border pool, and I think we're living through those right now. Then the second part is about how do we actually win that border pool in such a way that we can create a successful new Ireland. And then thirdly, what are the things we need to do after the vote to make a success? Because the key thing in all of this is that we want to avoid the chaos of Brexit, as I see it.
Yeah, and that echoes a lot of what Professor Colin Harvey said in the last session, where there is this real need to actually plan and prepare, because we have seen the disaster that has occurred because of a lack of planning, a lack of honesty, and a lack of forward thinking with the Brexit referendum. So you said that you're from what's traditionally seen as a Unionist background and from East Belfast. People might think it was quite unusual to find someone from a Unionist background who advocates United Ireland. Is that true, do you think, or has that changed again since Brexit?
I think it has changed. I mean, I think even before Brexit, there are more people from my background who are open to the idea of Irish unity. I mean, in many ways, the thing that really allowed me, I've always considered myself to be Irish. Initially, it was Irish in addition to being British, but my sense of Britishness dissipated over time. And living in Scotland, spending a lot of time in London and working for 5 years in Wales, you get a better sense of self, or I did. And I went to university in Scotland, in Dundee, at the time of the first IRA ceasefire in '94, and that was great that it happened. But just living and studying next to people from across the rest of Ireland, and not having that oppressive atmosphere of the Troubles around me at all times, it made it so much easier for me to get a sense of my own Irishness, but also to realize that I had so much in common with other people from across the rest of Ireland. And for me, coming from a Unionist and a Presbyterian background, before the ceasefires, before the Good Friday Agreement, the problem that I saw it seemed very much to me that people who were Irish, who wanted Irish unity, were attacking people from my background, and therefore it was very difficult for me to even contemplate a united Ireland, because that had a lot of negative connotations during the Troubles. The fact that people were trying to achieve unity through violence and the threats of violence, and I really objected to that. So it wasn't something I was willing to entertain. But once we had the ceasefires, and then particularly the Good Friday Agreement, the beauty of the Good Friday Agreement was you could be British, Irish, European, or a combination of all three, and that was very positive, and it meant the borders didn't really matter, and you could be a combination of things. You know, I've described it before as you could wake up in the morning and say, do I want a United Ireland tomorrow? Oh no, it's all right, things are fine as they are, because you could sit in Belfast, and you could look to London, you could look to Dublin, you could look to Brussels, you could look wherever, and you could feel comfortable in your own sense of self. But Brexit really separates that out, and I think for a lot of people that has accelerated their thinking as well. But I think there's a real difference between political unionism, which isn't willing to engage in this discussion at all, or very infrequently, and civic unionism. You know, people who come from a cultural unionist background. I think there's a much more pragmatic approach to that. I know from talking to government officials in Dublin, and I know from talking to people in the political parties here in Northern Ireland, that those discussions are already happening, and I think they'll continue to happen. I think a lot of it is it can be quiet contemplation in the privacy of people's own homes, or it can be in discussions with friends and family. But it is definitely happening, because I know lots of people here who are having the same discussions that I've been.
Yeah, so I mean, again, that suggests that we're actually coming to a more mature sense of what it means to be Irish. And one of the things I think that the Troubles did, not just the modern ones, but the turn of the last century as well, or the 19th and 20th century. At that point, I think there was more of a sense of those who were Irish could be from different religious backgrounds. For example, in my own family, my great grandfather and his sisters lived together in the same house, obviously, and they were part of a mixed marriage. And the boys basically they were brought up as Catholics, and the girls were brought up as Protestants, in pretty much the same way as, you know, in one family nowadays, somebody might be a Liverpool supporter and another might be a Man United supporter. And I think we're kind of going back to that sense of identity not being so absolute. And I think that's a really, really good thing, because I think we've all got elements of Irishness and Britishness in our family histories and in our lives. So it's really, really good to see that, you know, this is emerging. And I mean, I'm right in saying as well that Presbyterianism has always been defined as it has defined itself as an Irish church. Is it the Presbyterian Church of Ireland?
Yes, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it goes back to the the radical liberal approach of a United Irishman in the 1790s. And again, you know, it's simple things. I think there was a lack of history. I mean, I can remember as a kid watching a black and white documentary about the Easter Rising, and I can't remember what age I was, but it would have been, I probably wasn't even in my teens. I think I might have been younger than that. I didn't realize until I watched the documentary that there had ever been a United Ireland, because I just wasn't told that. United Irishmen, hearing about Protestant, Catholic, and dissenter coming together and wanting to bring together people in equality and peacefulness, and making sure that everyone that had the same right to vote and were treated equally. That was amazing, but that was something that I didn't learn about until I was in my 20s. It wasn't taught in history lessons for me at school. And similarly, things like the finding out, it wasn't until I was in my 20s that a friend explained to me what the Irish Tricolor actually stands for: green, white, and orange. Because growing up in the Troubles, and was born in '76, growing up in the 80s and 90s, we were always told it was green, white, and gold, and then being told green stands for nationalism, orange stands for unionism, and white is the peace between the two main traditions on the island. And that really opened my thinking. And you realize, as you say, that there had been a time before where things weren't so rigid and it wasn't so black and white. And that is part of the problem. Whenever you look at it now, one of the problems of partition is that we had two states in this island, and unfortunately both of them ended up being dominated by different religions, and they were both in many ways a cold house for the minority religion at that time, and that is not a healthy place to be. And I think things have moved on, and I think it is good. But once you realize, I realized I could be Irish without having to be a particular religion, without having to play a particular sport, and without having to have a particular view about what happened during the Troubles. And but I could still be Irish in my own way, and that was great. And going back to 2011, we've just seen King Charles has just visited Northern Ireland as part of his UK tour following the passing of Queen Elizabeth. And we saw his interaction with the Sinn Féin MLAs as well as the Unionist ones, and that's great. I mean, I remember going back to 2011 and seeing the Queen in Dublin Castle standing up and speaking Irish to the President of Ireland and to other people, and to sharp and take a breath, people were so pleased and impressed. And I thought, that's great. And then she went and paid her respects at the Garden of Remembrance to those who'd fought and died in the Easter Rising, and that really creates a lot of space. It's one of the things I refer to in my book. I don't. While I want Irish unity, I don't like political violence and the threats of it. I never have done. I think it's wrong. But I recognize that there are those that believe that, those involved in the Easter Rising in 1916 are heroes and were patriots and they did the right thing. I find it difficult to celebrate that violence. But having said that, if the Queen, if the head of state of the UK, the monarch, was willing to go and pay her respects to those who were involved in the Easter Rising, the rest of us should be able to do that as well, regardless of what our background is. I think that's key. And then the following year, whenever she shook hands with Martin McGuinness, and Martin McGuinness shook hands with her, coming from a Unionist background and feeling a growing sense of my Irishness, that really, I thought that was great, and it showed how things were developing and revolving, and giving us all a greater sense of space about how we view the world and our place within it.
Yeah, and there's probably two interesting things there that I've thought of, and I'll mention the latter one first. When you talked about the 1916 Rising and the role that plays in Irish history, and all the different feelings and the different perspectives that it might evoke. What I find interesting is I was on a visit to Dublin a couple of months ago, and I went on a tour, a boat tour of the Liffey, and the guy who was doing the tour started to talk about how in recent times in Dublin as well, there is this shift towards more awareness maybe about minority figures, because one thing as well which has kind of probably been lost in the creation of two very masculine states on the island of Ireland, we lost that sense of various other people, and especially women, being actively involved in politics, and especially maybe from the socialist perspective. So it was really good to see that in Dublin now, I think her name's Rosie Hackett, they created a bridge in honor of her, or renamed the bridge in honor of her, because she was a trade unionist, I think, and a socialist, and she's actually the first woman that's recognized in that way. So again, I think there's just this growing consciousness of minorities in Ireland, and people being equal, I think, regardless of the demographics. I mean, again, to digress a bit more, I mean, I was home a few weeks ago as well, and just watching the young athletes, whose parents were African, and just how passionate they are about Ireland. And they feel Irishness without any of the the old sort of attachments that our ancestors would have had. But another thing that I was very interested in when you were talking about Presbyterianism and just this binary sense of how you know, we don't know enough about each other, or we didn't want to know each other in any detailed way. I had a similar experience when I was working in Belfast just after I finished university, and I was reading Dr. John Dunlop's book, A Precarious Belonging, and there are so many references there to a different kind of Irishness. And I remember one of my colleagues, an older lady at the time, she came up to me in the corridor and she kind of whispered and said, "Oh, you're reading about us." And I actually just thought, you know what? I'm reading the story of a man's life who, you know, from his perspective on life, it was actually not that different to mine, because I would say he was very socialist in his outlook, you know, and quite aesthetic, but also he had a lot of elements of the academic as well. So, you know, I just found that really interesting. So just
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that I mean, I'm not a regular churchgoer. I don't want to misrepresent myself for being highly religious. I still have my beliefs, but I just I don't attend church on a regular basis. But I do. That is the thing that it resonates with me now as much as ever. That sort of the Presbyterian ethos of egalitarianism and just seeking to treat everyone equally. And I think it's about looking at that through a modern prism. And I think you're absolutely right that what people sometimes refer to as the new Irish don't have the same baggage that those of us who've come from previous generations have, and that's a good thing. You know, it's the old saying about strength through diversity, and I think that's a positive. And once you start trying to move away from this cultural war of a zero-sum game of if they win, then I lose, whoever they are and whoever I am, that I find that really liberating. If you can, you know, I think it's possible to celebrate and enjoy a range of cultures without appropriating somebody else's culture. It's being respectful and just appreciating it, and I think that is a really positive way forward. And once you start thinking like that, I find it very liberating in that sense. And my sense of Irishness doesn't have to be the same as anybody else's. It's just about but I think for me also it's about the practicalities, and Brexit brings it all home again about wanting to work together on this small island and not having barriers put up by others and by the votes of others on another island. You know, putting that back in here whenever we've all striven so long to remove those.
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking about that as well. I mean, I grew up in a town called Brookborough, which, you know, is only 20 miles from the border, and is well known, I think, in history for various people that have obviously come from there. You know, Lord Brookborough, it was also the place where the Brookborough raid of Sean South took place. But I was there, actually. The reason I'm talking about this is I was there on the evening after I had interviewed Colin Harvey in the previous podcast, and I was meeting up with American cousins, and one of them, my cousin's wife, she said to me, she said, "I'm so proud to be here in Ireland because my family are 5 generations of pure Irish. I'm so proud to call myself Irish." And at that point, we were sitting in a little pub called the Forest Inn in Brookborough, and I just looked out onto the main street and I just thought, we're here in a town where a large percentage of the population have lived here all their lives. And yet this woman whose family left 5 generations ago feels proud to call herself Irish. And my thought was, well, on one level, what have we done? What have we done so wrong? You know, we've all got to accept our part in that. So What more could nationalism and republicanism, or those from that background, do to convince Unionists that they've got nothing to fear in a united Ireland and that they can be proud as well of saying that they're Irish?
Well, that's it. And I think it comes back to, again, the only time you find people from the island of Ireland who don't refer to themselves as Irish, well, the majority of it happens to be people from within one particular part of the island of Ireland, i.e. within Northern Ireland. But I think I know lots of people that were ardent Unionists and going across, living in Britain, America, continental Europe, wherever. Their sense of Irishness grows, and I think it's easier. I guess is it the particular, is it the petri dish of living within Northern Ireland in particular that people react to their environment and therefore feel they have to define themselves that way? But I think it is changing. I think you know, and this isn't all about the census, but I think the census will be interesting. But if we look at the Northern Ireland Assembly election results, you know, it is only around 40% now that are voting for Unionist parties. Yes, it's about the same amount that are voting for nationalists, and then around 20% in the middle, or at least in the latest opinion polls, that has been the intention going forward. And I think that's where we need to. I think it's about giving people assurance, and that's why I think there has to be a part of the planning process in advance of referendum is making it clear how people's rights and rights are going to be safeguarded. And I think it's ironic that political unionism, or certain parts of political unionism, have embraced this hard Brexit approach and have hitched their wagon to the ERG, European Research Group approach to life, this notion of getting rid of the European Convention on Human Rights. I mean, apart from the fact that that is actually legally bound within the Good Friday Agreement and therefore can't be easily unpicked, it's the fact that being part of the EU and having access to the European Convention on Human Rights, those are things that will ensure that unionism and unionists will have their rights maintained in a reunified Ireland. I mean, I think there'll be safeguards anyway, but I think it's frustrating. I mean, I whenever I worked in the Northern Ireland office as a press officer, one of my areas of responsibility was working for the Bill of Rights Forum, and here we are. That was in 2006-07, and here we are in 2022, approaching the end of 2022, and we still don't have a Bill of Rights that was, you know, foretold back in you know, the Good Friday Agreement back in 1998. And I think we have to try and break out of that mindset, or encourage people to come out of that mindset, that equality is equality for all, safeguards are safeguards for all, and we all benefit from that. It isn't a zero-sum game, that we will all benefit from that, and it's about giving people that safety. And I think that's why one of the things I write in my book is that it's important that we absolutely need to plan in advance, and we need to have a detailed plan for how we are going to bring peace and prosperity to the PUL, Protestant Unionist Loyalist community. And I mean that at the most grassroots level, because I've been involved in conferences in previous jobs where you're talking about peace walls, and it's horrifying. We now have more peace walls than we did at the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. But I know that whenever you speak to people, and those walls invariably are in areas of social and economic deprivation, which is terrible, those are also the areas that suffered the most during the Troubles. And we've got to find some way of improving things. And we've had partition for 100 years. David McWilliams, the economist, sets it out very well. At the time of partition, it was thought that partition couldn't work because there's no way that the 26 counties, the Free State as it was then, could possibly survive without the economic powerhouse that was Belfast and the surrounding counties. And now we look at it, and depending on which metrics you use, you know, GDP, the economic growth, the industrial output of the Republic of Ireland compared to Northern Ireland is massive. So I don't see how you can say in any shape or form that partition has been anything but disastrous for Northern Ireland. Now, I know quite rightly some will say that the Troubles and all the economic warfare and everything else that went with that played its part, and absolutely it did. But we've had next year will be 25 years from the Good Friday Agreement, I know I'm one of those few people who actually came back to Northern Ireland after doing my undergraduate degree in Dundee. I went off to Edinburgh, worked there for a few years, and I came back a second time. So it's even rarer. But lots of my friends, I have a brother in London, another brother in New York. Lots of my friends went away and never came back. And that brain drain, and I know we're seeing it now in the Republic for different reasons, that people are just being priced out of housing in the Republic. But whether you're from north, south, east, or west of Ireland, we have to do something to fix the fact that people are leaving because they feel they have no choice. Whatever that rationale is, that's a sad indictment of where we are now. And absolutely, it's great. I experienced it myself. It's a great opportunity to be able to go and live and work elsewhere and build your life if you so choose. But I think it's very sad and it's unfortunate if people feel they're forced to go whenever they actually want to stay, because if they, once people leave, it's rare for them to come back. And it's sad that people feel they're forced to have to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there's two great things in there as well, and two thoughts that I had. I mean, talked about the economic deprivation, and one of the things that I think is sad, and I mean, people listening to this will obviously largely come from the political left in Britain and Ireland. I often wonder, we had David Irvine in many ways. He emerged as a potential socialist leader in the Unionist community, and yet one of the things, and this isn't a I'm not condemning him for this. He's perfectly entitled to have said this. But one of the things he always said, which struck me as contradictory almost, he said that he was British first and a socialist second. I would have always really liked to see somebody emerge from the Unionist community on the left, considering that Britain itself does also have such a strong tradition of people emerging from working class communities and given leadership to the left, but that has never really happened in Northern Ireland, I think. But I suppose that's probably a discussion for another day. The second point then that I was thinking about was, this has been a very, very hopeful discussion, and it's very much about progress. So I guess in the second part of your book, you deal with this. So just very quickly, when do you think that a border poll might actually come about, and what would the likely outcome be in the short or medium term?
Well, I think it's definitely nothing other than death or taxes are guaranteed in this life. But I think my guess would be that we will have one in the next 10 years and perhaps earlier than that. We know that the current Taoiseach has said there won't be one between now and 2025, but of course it isn't within his gift anyway. It's within the gift technically of the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, but he or she is only ever going to announce that there's going to be one with the agreement of the UK Prime Minister, and we would hope there would be consultation with the Irish government and others before that would happen. But I think it definitely could happen in the next 10 years. In terms of the outcome, I mean, I know there are those who think, well, we're just going to get the first border poll across the line, and if we don't win it, it doesn't matter. We'll definitely get it. It'll be chipping away. I would be hopeful that we could actually win that in the first go, because I think the very fact that the border poll is being called is a sign that the UK government is likely to be a sign that the UK government recognises there is a majority in favour of Irish unity. And I describe it in my book as it's like the French army in the Second World War had the Maginot Line, that they'll go this far and no further. I think this is the problem, that political unionism isn't engaging in this discussion. I really wish they would, because I want to hear what a positive vision is for staying part of the UK. And if we can have an evidence-based, detailed discussion about the benefits of staying in the UK versus the benefits of Irish unity, then we will win. We will all win by having that informed debate and discussion on actual practical facts and realities, and then make an informed decision on that basis. But I think you look at those that centre ground. It's the Alliance and Green vote is going to be key in this. If you look at various polls like Lucid Talk, the second preferences tends the majority. The second preferences of those who vote Alliance and Green is for nationalist parties. And I think that gives you an indication of where they're likely to vote. They also tend to be very pro-European. And unfortunately, I regret it bitterly. I really wish that the UK had voted to remain, but they chose not to. And we are now suffering the consequences of the votes of people in England and Wales predominantly. You know, I have direct family members and friends. They voted for Brexit. I respect their right to vote that way, but I fundamentally disagree with it. I think it's a bad decision. But I think that context makes it, and I think there is, you know, Richard Nixon talked about the silent majority. I think there's a silent, significant percentage of civic unionism that I think are open to the idea. Now, what I think will change that will be us putting the plan in place. And that's part of one of the things that I want to see. And I hope in a very small way, I do not have all the answers. I'm not sure I have any of the answers, but I just wanted to put my thoughts out there because I'm so passionate about we need the plans so that we do avoid that chaos of Brexit. But I think if we put that plan in place and we start that process now, then it will be, we will have a ready plan, and we want to go through, you know, citizens' assemblies and all that sort of stuff. And the Irish government needs leading that. And I think it'll be interesting. It's just been announced that Leo Varadkar, the current Taoiseach, who will take over as Taoiseach in December, he's agreed to speak at this upcoming Ireland's Future event in October. So you're having pretty much all the main leaders of nationalism in the Republic, except for Micheál Martin speaking. And you've got got both Michelle O'Neill and Colm Eastwood speaking from Northern Ireland. So I'm hopeful that we could win. I mean, it's stipulated in the Good Friday Agreement. It's 50% plus one vote of of those votes that are cast carries the day. There doesn't have to be a unionist. It's not a dual mandate. It's not a unionist. It doesn't have to require a unionist majority as well as an overall majority. Although some unionist commentators have tried to suggest otherwise. But I think it'll be much more than just 50% plus one, frankly, because I think the more we can talk about this and engage in the issues, that'll bring the idea and the concept to life for people. And I think it'll give them more assuredness, and we'll have that pathway, that roadmap towards the new Ireland. And I think people will embrace that.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think one of the great things about this interview has been that it has shown that there is a willingness there of people on the unionist side to engage with the discussion. And we would like to hear more of those voices in the future, because one of the criticisms maybe is that that there isn't enough engagement with unionism, but certainly this podcast, and I guess other forums, and Ireland's Future as well, and in the last podcast with Colin Harvey, that was made very clear as well. We want to have these discussions, and again, we want everything to be on the table. As you've said, Ben, if people can present strong counter arguments, at least let's get the chance to hear them. So just on a final note then, we'll give you a plug for your forthcoming book. So we'd just like to just very quickly tell us where we can get a copy of the book and when the launch will be and so on.
Yes, there's going to be a launch in the Linen-Hall Library on the 6th of October at 7:30. Booking details for that are on the Eventbrite website. It's available for pre-order via all good bookshops across the UK and Ireland, and the launch will be on the 6th of October. And I'm keen for people to read it, and hopefully I can play a small part in us continuing this conversation, because I think that's how we will benefit. I mean, just to finish, to say that I think we must all continue to offer the opportunity to engage to unionism. But if unionism, particularly political unionism, chooses not to take part in these discussions in advance of a border poll, they can't veto progress or the planning. We can give them the opportunity to engage. But I think, as I said before, civic unionism is already engaging behind the scenes and increasingly in public forums, and that's very welcome. People should have nothing to fear from that engagement, because ultimately this is all about us wanting to create a better world, a better Ireland for all of us who live here and all of us who care about here.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. So thanks very much, Ben, and I look forward to reading your book in the near future as well.
Thanks very much. All the best.
Okay, thank you.